Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out our shows and join the conversation at thehippocratic-collective.com. Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Before we jump into this week's episode, I want to remind you that Creating Space, my coaching course and retreat, is open for registration and enrollment now. I am so excited that folks are signing up for spending 6 months with me online and then 4 days with me in person at a spa retreat later on this year. And I want you to be in there. So head to joanchanmd.com/space and book a call with me. You get to chat with me by phone, learn if this program is right for you. So head to joanchanmd.com/space. I can't wait to talk to you and invite you into Creating Space. Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so this is sort of a timely topic-based episode. I'm recording this in the middle of July, and there's been something that's happened in my world, in the world of primary care and family medicine, in the province in which I practice and live, Ontario in Canada. And it's been interesting. I've been watching a lot of the discussion around it, and I really wanted to make an episode about it. So the change that was announced a few weeks ago now is that the funding model for practices like mine, which are like outpatient family medicine practices where I have like a roster of patients that are mine to care for. It used to be called a family health organization or a FHO. And now the OMA, Ontario Medical Association, which is like not a union, but like our body of physicians who negotiate on our behalf with the government for things like funding. They have been in, I think, just chronic, constant negotiations and discussion with the ministry about paying physicians more. And they have announced that this has been something that the government and the OMA have been able to agree with, which is this thing called FHO Plus. Even if you are not a FHO family physician in Ontario, I do think that this episode would be worth listening to or watching, because the main kind of teaching point and concept that I want to go over is one that's very fundamental to a lot of self-awareness work, and certainly is very fundamental to the style of coaching that I was trained in, that I use for myself all the time. Because what I saw as this announcement rolled out is, first, we heard from the OMA themselves, and they had agreed to certain conditions in the model. There's a set of conditions that have been agreed to. It's like laid out in a legal arbitration document. And then people started to tell stories about those sets of facts. And the first one I heard from was the OMA themselves. They sent out an email. They're like, great news. This FHO Plus model is going to be so great. Here are all of its benefits. And so that's one way to tell a story. And then I started to see like the scuttlebutt, like in the group chats and in the office. And this morning I just watched a webinar where they had like a Q&A, and it was really fascinating in all these different places to see the different stories that people are telling about the same set of facts. That's what I thought would be interesting to explore, and is a skill that I really recommend everyone consider building in themselves. Because a lot of times things that we pass around that we think are like absolute facts and truths of the universe are actually just stories that maybe, if you think about it, you agree with and you want to believe and you want to pass around. But also knowing that those stories are optional, and there may be other ways to tell the story of the same situation that end up feeling better to you, serving you better, getting you the results you actually want out of the circumstance, right? So the way that I learned it in like the life coach school I went to is like C versus T. circumstances versus a thought. So circumstances are like those neutral facts that everyone can agree on. So in this case, I would say that like the neutral facts we can agree on is like in the arbitration document, this is how they have described this new funding model and all of its elements, including it'll be factual that certain elements are not fully clear yet. It'll be factual that certain elements have not even been agreed to yet. And that's sort of where the fact piece of it ends. That's then where, instead of it being a neutral circumstance and a set of facts, the stories start flourishing. And it's been really interesting, understandably, because people are really stressed and really burnt out. Change is scary. And I will say that there's many people, especially like I think really brainy people like physicians, where it's like, I'm going to analyze and dissect this whole thing. And especially if you're burnt out and also very smart and dissecting a whole thing, you're going to like quickly come to a conclusion. And often that conclusion means that everything is going to be terrible, right? And I'm not saying it's not going to be terrible, okay? I'm just saying that is an optional story that can have proof and facts behind it. And also, maybe there are other stories that come to different conclusions that are still based on the same facts. So, an example of how people could be like, oh, this is going to be so terrible. But then what they're saying the model will do appears to be pointing in completely opposite directions. So, I've seen people look at this model and then tell the story of like, oh man, the way they're changing the funding, the only way you're going to be able to like recoup the losses of expenses is by rostering a ton of people. And that's the only way you're going to be able to make money in this model. And you know, people are saying these as facts because that's how we talk. Like we don't say like, this is my assessment and my feeling at this time. We're like, oh, this is how it goes, right? And then someone else will be like, actually, I look the numbers and my assessment is we need to actually keep smaller roster size and then see the patients in that roster size more often. You know, and so like those are very different conclusions to the exact same set of facts. So just as an example, I'm not criticizing either of these people. I don't think either of these people are foolish. I actually understand in both cases why they've looked at the same set of facts and extrapolated them and made, you know, certain assumptions and prioritized certain ideas over others in order to come up with these conclusions. And so all of those are valid and can exist. My question always is, what are all the possible stories here? So let's like take a step back and know there are multiple stories we could tell about the same set of facts. Look at them all, and particularly look at like, what helps me thrive? What are the kinds of outcomes and results I am interested in finding? And then working backwards, what kinds of stories do I want to tell myself? What kinds of questions do I want to ask in order to look for those solutions and come to those conclusions? I know this feels like backwards. It's like, oh, well, if the math just shows that things are bad, then things are bad. But the interesting thing is like the math can never show things are bad. The math can show that a number goes up or down, but you always decide at a basic level if that means bad or good. And it's fine to assume that things are bad. I'm not saying that someone is silly or evil or foolish if they decide when they look at these sets of facts that this is bad. That's fine. I do think certain features of this model are not moving in the direction that I would wish we would move in, like on behalf of primary care. And so I still have like my sort of opinion that, say, after looking through this model, say the ministry was to ask my opinion, I would share with them that though there are features of this model that I think could be helpful and could support what they're hoping for, I think that it's incomplete, and actually think there's certain features that would be helpful to add to amplify what they're hoping to amplify more, which is to help family physicians feel more financially supported, to potentially even increase their capacity through the resource of money in order to see more patients and or take on more patients, because that's like the desired effect. I think the way that they've structured this now, I actually don't think it's going to necessarily get them to that goal, unfortunately. And so that's sort of, I would say, my general opinion that I would say to the ministry. That's different than if I think that because it doesn't serve the vision I have for it, does that mean that I can't enact my vision within this model, even though it's not designed for that? I don't believe that. I believe that there's a way I can still do it. It'll involve maybe not maximizing it to the level they want it to be maximized. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to like take on a million more patients based on this model, which maybe they're hoping I will. But certainly like the bottom line that my nervous system wants to know is, will I be okay with this model? Right? So when I was hearing all those different like opinions and concerns, you know, we have the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which is like rest, digest, learn. So we have our survival brain, you could say, or your learning brain. And if you've ever been in a coaching course with me, you've seen that survival brain versus learning brain video because I'm obsessed with it and love it so much. And what I am hypothesizing that I'm seeing in a lot of the comments in all these different places is conclusions that are being come to like on a survival brain basis, or at least I'm seeing their conclusions and they are activating my survival brain. I'm really, this entire podcast, going to mainly talk about what helps my brain to actually look at the math and make my own decision about it. And so when you listen to this, and if your brain works differently and you think in a different way, I'm not in any way criticizing how your brain thinks, but I am describing how my brain thinks because I've noticed a lot of us have similar brains. So if you either are a family physician and you're looking around, you're like, does this mean we're all doomed and we should all like quit immediately? I would posit that perhaps your survival brain is activated the way mine could get activated too. Like I was having these automatic thoughts of like, oh, am I like doomed? Is this going to like, you know, crush all my dreams and ruin all my plans? This seems so complicated. This seems so hard. I'm feeling worried. Like, will I have to roster more patients? I don't want to do that. Will I have to see more patients in person? Will I have to work more hours in order to be okay? I don't want to do that. And so like, that was like my survival brain kicking up, right? And it's interesting. So like when I have all of those thoughts, then I start to get overwhelmed. And in that survival brain state, when I get overwhelmed, then I start panicking and being like, I don't have time to learn about this myself. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good with money. Like the old money shame comes back. So like I have to just believe everything I'm seeing, even though there's actually conflicting conclusions. And basically the only message that I'm getting from any of this is that we're doomed and it's a bad deal and everything's terrible. And so then all of those are the thoughts in my head. And then the emotions that are coming up are things like anxiety and shame and overwhelm and dread and despair and frustration. And then when those are the emotions that are leading my actions, then my actions are like either kind of like doom scrolling discussions, but like not actually looking at the source text at all myself. And when I try and go to the source text and I start reading, like I'm already overwhelmed. So I try and read it and then my brain like completely shuts off. Right. And in doing so, like, what's happening then is my survival brain is fulfilling its own prophecy again, right? So it's like, I'm doomed. This is too hard. I'm bad at this. And then shockingly, then I doom myself ahead of time. And when I try and read it, like my brain shuts off. So I am quote unquote bad at reading. But I know at a baseline, I do know how to read. And the thing I've learned is when I am in learning brain, I know how to do basic math. And I know how money works. But it's like when you get into that panic state that you like forget basic things that you absolutely know. Like I know how much money I need to pay my overhead. I know how much money I need to keep paying my nurse practitioner. I know that because I have money dates every week. I look at the money coming in and out. I know my numbers now, actually. And it's just that when I'm in survival brain, all that goes out the window. And I feel like I just have to trust all these different people's opinions that don't even agree with each other instead of actually looking at the numbers for myself and asking myself, you know, more of like grounded learning brain questions. So when you ask scarcity questions, you get scarcity answers, right? Because your brain seeks evidence for your original hypothesis and discounts or ignores opposing evidence. That's how people believe the earth is flat. Like it's the same thing every time, right? And so the result of that is that I like pre-condemn myself to doing more financially poorly next year. And I just assume also that no one's on my side and the OMA is not even trying to help me. Like I end up feeling alone. Speaking of burnout, like this kind of thinking comes from a burnout place because it's you're chronically in survival brain, and then it contributes to your burnout. And you know what is absolutely financially devastating? If you are so overwhelmed, so isolated, so jaded, so burnt out that you decide to leave medicine altogether. That definitely hurts the pocketbook more than if you say found a way to work with an imperfect system to still resource yourself to do the kind of care that you've always done. This is a very helpful skill to develop, like I said before, because I don't know if you've noticed, but changes keep happening. And sometimes changes come along that are lovely and contribute to reducing your overwhelm and actually give you a little bit extra money or take a task off your plate. And like, that's lovely and something that we can celebrate. And then other times things come along and totally increase the invitation of how much you work, at least, and distract and ask for different kinds of your cognitive load and your time. And if you haven't developed the skill of creating space in your mind to say, that's okay, so this is what the facts are. Now I have the agency to decide the story I tell and therefore the actions I take in response to this set of facts. Like we all had that, 2020, suddenly the COVID numbers are climbing and things are shutting down. And then what you believed about those things greatly altered your experience of that whole year, right? For better or for worse. And so that's the skill that I'd love to kind of talk you through what I've been practicing over the last several weeks as I've heard about this. I've heard people discussing it. Definitely my survival brain would get activated like, oh, maybe this is a bad thing. Oh, maybe this is a good thing. What's going on? I'm overwhelmed. What am I going to do? Right? Listening to the webinar. So I will have these little pings of survival brain wanting to take me down pathways that I just know don't actually help me look at my numbers and decide for myself. And so I want to share the 3-step process that I use to take me from survival brain to learning brain. So then I can actually look at the neutral circumstance and look at the optional stories being offered to me, ask myself and my creative brain to generate any stories that I would prefer, and then what happens from there. So it's the 3 P's that take you from survival brain to learning brain in this case. So the first one is to pause and recognize the signs and symptoms that I'm in survival brain. So you'll know if you're in survival brain if you're feeling any of those feelings, like I was describing before: anxiety, shame, guilt, overwhelm, dread. If you're feeling really activated, if your brain's really spinning, if you're not very in touch with your emotions, still you can identify if you're in survival brain based on the kinds of thoughts you're having. So if you're having really black and white, all or nothing type thoughts where it's this deal is the worst thing that's ever happened or the best thing that's ever happened, that's black and white thinking, right? Or this is going to doom everyone or this is going to help everyone. That's black and white thinking. And so how do we step away from that? Just even if we end up still having a not favorable opinion of it, can we step back, actually look at the whole picture and form a more nuanced opinion about it that actually feels less alarming to us and isn't alarming to others as well? So that pause is so important, and recognizing that survival brain mechanism and recognizing those thoughts that are swirling in your head. And if it helps, really writing out those thoughts, giving them a voice. So they still have a place here, writing them out or saying them to a trusted friend of these are all the thoughts I'm thinking of. I've been sort of, journaling when they come up and oh, look, there they go again. And also completing the stress cycle. So noticing if your body's feeling very activated and your mind keeps racing, actually doing something physical to discharge the stress that you're feeling in your body. So taking deep breaths, shaking it off, singing, dancing, exercise, whatever helps you reset, take a step away from the material, get yourself rested, nourished, and then step number 2 is pivot. So I'll say all 3 of them are pause, pivot, pace. So pause was that taking a step back and getting the stress out of your body. Pivot is actually recognizing, okay, instead of survival brain, I want to invite my learning brain to be driving the bus now. And it can help to think about high quality, abundance-based, curious, self-compassionate, safety generating questions and asking those. So instead of asking how is this going to hurt me? How is this the worst thing ever? How will this be hard? In which case your brain will answer those questions and then you will think it's going to be terrible and hard and you're doomed. But what are some abundance, safety-based questions that you can be asking yourself as you open your mind to learning about the math and about the possible stories you can tell about that math, right? So a question that I was asking myself is, how can I make good money with this new model? I find that to be a bit of a stabilizing question, because a thing I see a lot, which is valid if it's what you're going for, which is how do you make the most money in this model? What does it incentivize when you take it to the max? And that is a useful question especially for the ministry to ask if like, okay, so if we take this to the mask, is that incentivizing the behaviors we want it to? And I would argue it might not be. And I'll get to that as I go through it. But in any case, like that's not a question that's useful for me because that's actually not ever been how I've practiced. Like right now, I'm not asking myself the question of like, how could I make the most money in the current funding model? Because if I wanted to make the most money, I would definitely have a higher roster. I would be working more hours personally. I would probably be paying my staff less. You know what I mean? Like I would be doing a bunch of things in order to maximize how much money I make. But the thing I've noticed is if I'm really having that as my singular goal, it feels terrible to me, especially when you're taking it to sort of the extreme of maximum in all directions. So I still want to make good money. I want to make sufficient money for like the line item of the salary I draw for myself, the line items of paying my staff, the line items of paying my rent and overhead, as well as ideally the line item of like saving for the future in a rainy day. Like I don't want to just make ends meet. I'd love there for to be some buffer. And so that's what I mean by good money. And so the current model, very imperfect, allows me to do that. A question that feels abundance and like learning brain based is, how can I make good money in this new model? How will it support me? There's an assumption that there's a way it can support me. Now, say I ask that question, I look at it and like get down to the brass tacks. I'm like, it won't be able to support all the things I want to have good money. It will support this much. But still, I'm coming from a place of like, I'm already safe. I already have enough. And how will this new model allow me to continue to have enough? And if it has bonus and like extra, that's amazing. Say it actually funds me so much more then I could hire more people to see more patients. Like that's bonus extra lovely. But that's also not the question I'm not asking. Like, how can I use this model to take on as many patients as possible to help with the primary care crisis? No. Like that's a secondary bonus if this model happens to incentivize that, which I'm not sure that it would. And that's too bad for the system, but that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is my side of the street, my corner of this system. How can I continue to tend to it, my little farmstead? How can I keep the crops growing exactly as is with a new model? That's my goal. And if I can find a way to do that, then I will be satisfied. I could still, send a letter to the ministry. Hey, if you wanted me to actually expand my practice, I think I could have if you funded it this way. But like that's extra. You see what I mean? I can still think this is a good enough model if it satisfies that question, right? Another way of asking it is, how can I resource myself, my staff, and my future in this model? So speaking to like, what is it that I specifically want this model to resource so I can keep my eye focused on what matters to me? Because there's lots of people, including the ministry and whatever, that want me to have my focus on all these other things, all the things that I should do in order to be a good whatever. Taking all of those away, what's the story I find serves me to tell about myself that allows me to view myself as a satisfactory doctor doing good work that I'm proud of? And money, resourcing that is absolutely a part of it. So how do I resource myself, the staff I need to do a good job, and my future in this model? Another way to ask it is, how can this model change work in my favor? So looking for the benefits and advantages. Because the survival brain is so attuned to seeing things negatively, it could actually miss if something could be working in my favor. How can I take advantage of what the system offers to me in order to use it in my favor, aligned with how I want to practice, like the spacious schedule that I have and all of that, right? And sort of starting with the baseline of like, if I don't change my behavior at all, what is likely to happen to my billing revenue? Like that's sort of the core question that would be helpful to know the answer to, and would help clarify, all the sort of scuttlebutt of what people are saying about their practices and how it'll impact them. That's still useful, again, for the ministry to know. If people who are saying this is terrible, this is wrong, it's faux minus, not faux plus, if they've really sat down and done the math for their practice and they've seen where the gaps will be, then I'm so happy that they are going to advocate to the OMA and say, hey, this is a problem. I still, though, need to see for myself in my practice what it is for me, because we're all different, right? And when I'm overwhelmed, I don't. Instead, I'm like, I assume it's all terrible. I've noticed in the past that often at times where other people are assuming it's all terrible, when I look at the math and the facts for myself, I just don't find it to be the case. Is there opportunity for it to be better? Yes. Do I think that anyone in the ministry is doing an amazing job? I cannot give them an A plus, to say the least. But it's not about them. It's not about proving if they're good or bad. I'm just saying, am I okay to keep trucking in my corner of this healthcare system? And then, as I'm resourced, then I can have capacity to do advocacy work, to offer my input when they're asking for it in a way that honors my capacity and not burn myself out freaking out about it. Right. And then the second piece of it is, so like, say I'm looking through the model, which I'm going to kind of talk through in a minute. And there are pieces where I go, ooh, that's kind of awkward or sticky. There's something about that change that I'm not sure how it's going to play out, right? Like, so how do I plan to address these? What are the options and opportunities to address the parts of the system that seem like they may be in some ways disadvantaging versus the system I have now? So it's still not a question of like, see, this is bad, now I'm doomed, and now it's going to only be way harder for me at the end. Yes, there might be a way that it's more challenging. I may think up solutions and decide that the effort of putting those solutions into place isn't worth it, but there still will be options there. So if it drops a certain bucket of funding or it rewards things in a certain way, how can I work that in my favor? And then I have my options to decide from. And then, so if I sort of answered all of that, then I feel like I'd be at a place of sufficiency and safety. It's like, okay, so I've looked at my numbers, and I'll just say the bottom line is, for me, when I looked at my numbers, even when I was being like super conservative, like not using the OMA numbers, but using other spreadsheets that like seem to really have it like very granular and probably slightly more accurately, it appears that the amount of money I'm making now will be similar, if not at least slightly more money, that I will make once this goes into effect. So I will make at least equal amount of money, and it seems likely I'll make at least a little bit more money. That, I mean, I could just close up shop now and be like, good, I've looked at the numbers, that's it. But also learning through the model, the sort of bonus extra way I could look at it is what behavior changes are possible and that would happen to increase my billing revenue in these models, and are any of them of interest to me and in alignment of what I'd want to be doing anyway. So how can I optimize the way I bill in this new model so that I am using my time efficiently according to what they will pay me for, but very much willing to leave a lot of money on the table. So an example of how this works now, so there's a certain billing code you can bill for diabetes visits. And so if I wanted to make the maximum amount of money possible, I would be like really making sure that all of my patients that technically have the diagnosis, if they're like A1C has ever been above 7, I'm seeing every single one of them every 3 months, and I'm billing that code. And so I do not do that because I am interested in my access supporting, acute care as well. I am very happy to delegate a bunch of those diabetic visits to my primary nurse clinician in the family health team, and actually only see them maybe like once or twice a year. This means I am leaving money on the table. I am not making as much as I could if I was seeing them all myself every time. And I feel great about that. I feel great about that because I'd rather hold more spots for like more acute care and other things that come in that my nurse clinician couldn't help me with. I also feel good about that because philosophically, I don't agree that everyone whose A1C happens to be above 6.5 once in their life needs to see me every 3 months forever. And so I know that's what at some point they thought was a good idea, but like, I just don't even think it's evidence-based. And so if you're out there and you're doing that and that's helping support your business, that's really cool. Just for me, I'm looking at the model that exists, looking for the pieces that support my business and make enough money for me, but that don't end up having an unintended consequence that hurts the overall mission. And my overall mission is, high quality patient care, including some amount of timeliness as much as I have ability to them seeing me, and some amount of availability, but honoring my humanity, my capacity. And so you've heard me talk about, like, I have a private nurse practitioner who sees patients for me. So that optimizes my access beyond my own capacity. And that feels really good. And that's the piece that I actually think would be great if the ministry really did help to fund, that I don't see it directly funds in this model. I think that would be very smart of them to realize that that's a very effective and known mechanism for increasing patient access, including increasing people's patient roster size that they can hold. So attaching patients, which is very much of interest to the ministry right now. Like if they were actually financially supporting directly people to do this in this model, then we would probably be doing it more. And that would be a behavior that's worth incentivizing. But even though that's not what's happening, I am looking at this model through the lens of I'm not changing that because that system works so well for me. Like having the nurse practitioner there, like I'm asking the question, how can I support the model I currently have using this new funding model that's coming into place, right? So those are the questions when I like stepped away from the situation. So I paused. And then I pivoted to asking these like abundance learning brain based questions. Those are the kinds of questions that came to me that as I'm reading through this model, I'm going to ask myself again and again and like get that better information. And then the third P is pace. So just knowing that I have deeply conditioned stories about being bad with money. I know that if I dove into this too much, too fast, too soon, tried to sit down in one session and like figure it all out, tried to do it sort of the hard way, that wouldn't work. Like I needed to pace myself as I was reading through this material and doing research. And so shorter bursts of learning in different ways and using different tools to help me with it. So like the one tool that I used that was really helpful was I took the whole PDF document and I put it into ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT to summarize that one section. And then I went back to the source material and fact checked it because ChatGPT does not always get it right. But there was something about having it as this beautiful, like much easier to read, summarized outline that then I could go back to the source material and like add in extra details. Like I would look at it and be like, oh, I don't understand what this means. Go in and actually clarify it based on the source material. A really helpful mechanism that I recommend. And so that helped me pace, is like having this robot help me learn about this particular model, right? And then the last thing I want to say that goes along with pace is like, notice that in order to do this, I had to have space in my schedule to do this. So if I, like anyone who's listening out there and they're like, how did she have the time to do this? It's because I hold time that I don't have dedicated to anything in case things like this come up. When things like this don't come up, I, rest, go for walks, play the ukulele. I usually use that time for like creative relaxation time. And when something like this comes up, then in a paced way, I have space to actually look at it and know my values and make my own analysis based on what matters to me. And so as a short plug, if you wish you had space in your schedule, that's what my coaching program, Creating Space, is all about. And I would love to have you in it because I genuinely, if anything, I wish that this FHO Plus model knew that one of the things that family physicians need in order to very effectively and efficiently and productively run an outpatient family practice, they need space to do that. And in some ways, this model does address that because it directly funds like clinical oversight time and indirect patient care work. I think it could have funded more of that, but in any case, like it does sort of fund some of this stuff, which is interesting, right? Like this time next year, once this model is in place, the hours that I spent reading about this model, I could argue they're related to QI and patient care, and I would then probably bill for these hours that I've spent learning about this. So like it is incentivizing it in some way, but it could go further because like the main thing it doesn't address, in my opinion, is explicit additional funding for other people seeing your patient roster alongside of you, even if you are not present. And that's a bit of a gap that it doesn't have. So in any case, I did want to actually like just talk through like the high level key points that I found helpful to understand and know for myself, including a bit of my commentary based on like times that my survival brain would go off and then sort of my learning brain response to those. So I hope you find this helpful. This part maybe is less helpful for people who aren't in Ontario primary care, but if you're interested in how doctors are paid, this could still be of interest to you. But I hope to so say you're like going to step off from the podcast now because that piece of it, the details don't matter to you. The bottom line is notice if you think you're telling yourself the true story and think it's the truth of the universe, is it actually factually a neutral math-based story, or is it actually like a narrative you're attaching on top to it? In other words, are you talking about the circumstance or are you talking about the thoughts and story you're having about that circumstance? Most of the time, our brains do it all the time. They generate those thoughts and a story and feelings about it. And so it can be very useful to pause, pivot to actually learning brain and getting down to like learning about the actual circumstances of the matter and pacing yourself as you learn about it. So that's sort of the teaching point. Now, onwards to the actual model itself. So the confirmed elements of the FHO Plus model that we have so far, it's scheduled to start in April 1st, 2026. So no one needs to immediately know all the details. I will just say there's also many details that haven't been confirmed, like specific codes, the mechanism of how some of this would be claimed. So there's more details to come. I still think it's very valuable to understand the baseline of it. So then as each new wave of information comes in, you won't be like starting from scratch at that point. But it also means like coming to concrete solutions isn't necessarily helpful because like we don't even know how it's all going to play out yet, right? And we could like make a really strong opinion in one direction and then new information comes to like, and then suddenly it's taking a whole new direction, right? So the core funding changes. So the capitation, so that's the amount we're paid per patient per month, remains unchanged. Two other parts of how we're paid in the FHO model now that are also a per patient per month thing. One's called the CCM. I forgot to write down what that stands for, but some other additional amount of money that is going away, as well as the access bonus, which was an additional piece of funding, again, that was based on patients rostered. And both of those things are being removed. And that money is a part of the money that is then going into a new way that we will be funded, which is an hourly payment. Another very important feature to be named is that means the negation aspect of the access bonus is also gone. And no matter what, even if they end up putting something like it in, I still think it is worthwhile celebrating that the way negation was done before is gone, because the way negation happened before was terrible. Basically, we would get like a monthly report of every time one of our patients that's rostered to us was seen by a family physician in a different setting. And based on that, we would be financially penalized. So our access bonus would be reduced by like the dollar amount of the fees that another doctor made from our patients, like in a walk-in clinic, but often it would also be like in an emergency room, in a hospital. Like there was codes that the ministry didn't realize were being billed in settings that there's no way I could have seen them instead. And the whole idea of the access bonus is it's supposed to incentivize you to make yourself more available so your patients don't go to walk-in clinics. It completely flies in the face of how human behavior works because I cannot be incentivized or penalized in an effective way for the behavior of others. So, you know, if there was some sort of incentive or negation on the patient, that would force them to change their behavior. But this idea that the only reason that patients would go do negating activities, including walk-in clinics, the only reason they do walk-in clinics is because I'm less available, is a very flawed assumption. So I have to pause and celebrate that is gone, because it's been terrible for patient physician relationships. It's often caused, you know, physicians who get quite like focused or even obsessed on the access bonus could push themselves well beyond their limits in hopes that they could see every single patient that ever calls for any issue as soon as they want to, right? And burn themselves out in the process and not provide their highest quality care, in my opinion. Also, say patients did go then see a walk-in clinic, there would be some physicians who would like call up their patients, yell at them, fire them because of it. Like it would completely break down therapeutic relationships between physicians and patients. I don't think that's what the ministry was going for. So it is lovely to see that is gone and we got to celebrate it. Moving on. So the newest way that funding happens. So like I just described that two pieces of the funding have been removed. So that does seem like then it's a pay cut. And part of the question is it really a pay cut or not? What they are saying is that money is not being cut, it's being redirected in a new way. So it's still going to come to me and anyone who's in this FHO model, but in a new way, which is in an hourly billing model. And so what they're describing is that it's an $80 per hour payment for hours you spend directly seeing patients. And also you'll get paid for the hours you spend doing indirect care, as well as clinical administrative tasks. I'm going to name specifically what those are. And I will say though, there is a percentage cap on the amount of hours that you can claim doing non-patient facing care. in relationship to the hours you spend doing patient care, which is also a thing I would argue is unnecessary, but I'm not in charge of this. All I'm in charge of is how I respond to what they have in front of us. So what counts as direct patient care is in-person visits, virtual visits conducted in the clinic, so phone or video, but you're on site in the clinic. Though if it's a phone visit, it's at a slightly lower rate, like 68 something, because the ministry hates phone visits for some reason, as if they're never appropriate and as if we can't wisely decide when they're appropriate or not. Anyway, it also counts as patient care when you are doing clinical teaching concurrent with direct patient care. This is interesting because I have residents in my practice now. So it could mean there's times where it's even the resident who's seeing the majority of the patients, if say they're doing like a resident run clinic, but I'm still on site supervising them, still seeing patients as needed, certainly reviewing the cases and overseeing the care. And that would still count as direct patient care. So that could actually increase the amount of hours that are patient care without me personally seeing a bunch of patients. It could be more that I'm supervising a resident who's doing the majority of like the tasks related to seeing the patient, and either I'm just coming in the end or reviewing and overseeing their work. So that's direct patient care. Indirect care is a longer list. I think I'm not actually going to read it all out, but it's about charting certain aspects of the inbox. So like reviewing results, referrals and requisitions, chart review if you need to do that. One that I'm happy to hear about is if I'm doing patient communication, including asynchronous communication. As you may know, if you've listened to past episodes, I do a lot of asynchronous messaging with my patients. And right now I'm a part of like a funding pilot for like billing for those. But because it's in basket, I only get a percentage of the fee. So like it comes to at most like $54 a month. I was doing it when it was free as well because it helps my access and it feels good to me. But it will be nice that that will be better funded at like the $80 an hour. So that's lovely. Another thing I saw was care coordination, care planning, and consulting with other physicians or health professionals who are caring for my patients. And so Amy, my nurse practitioner, is another health professional. And so the time I spend doing like, consulting with patients for her, even if I'm not on site, but if she's asking me questions and like reviewing patients with me, which happens semi-regularly actually in an asynchronous manner, I could bill for those, like probably it'll be 15 to 30 minutes max a day, but like that's a little extra time that I can bill for that right now I'm not being compensated for. So that's lovely. Other things that count as indirect patient care: reviewing and analyzing research related to a particular patient. So like reading up on a case kind of thing, that gets to count. Doing forms, that's another major one. So, and it does appear that we still can bill for the forms too. Oh yes, excluding services that are third party in which the physician can bill the patient directly. Okay, so actually, I didn't actually fully read that till right now. So these would be specifically forms that I'm not allowed to charge the patient for. So say I'm doing, a handicap forms, like there's certain forms that I just had one the other day where I'm the guarantor for a patient. I now could bill for the time it took to do that form because I'm not allowed to bill the patient for it. But if I am allowed to bill the patient for it, I'm not allowed to bill those hours. That's actually really useful to know and changes some of my calculations now that I think about it. One other thing that I noticed is not included on this list that is like a large proportion of my inbox is prescription renewals, like fax prescription renewals. And I did already know that that isn't an OHIP covered service, but there's something about like looking at it and being like, right, so that's not going to be included in this new list. So the time I spent doing fax prescription renewals, I'm not allowed technically to charge the government for that part of my indirect patient care. It doesn't count. And so one thing that really motivated me to consider is something I was already considering, which was finding a way to like efficiently and in a non-overwhelming to my staff fashion, start charging for fax prescription renewals because it just really, really isn't covered by OHIP. And I'm looking into like a couple of those companies that like help manage that for you. And that's sort of useful because that's something I was already considering doing anyway, recognizing it's not covered by OHIP now either. And this is sort of further reinforcing like, yes, okay, fax prescription renewals, they need a completely different workflow. Because like say I'm in my inbox and I'm doing those at the same time I'm doing these other things, it's like, I'm not going to try and track minute by minute based on the task. Like it'll be useful then to kind of block my time. So it's like OHIP covered inbox time and then non-OHIP covered inbox time, which would be like third party forms and fax prescription renewals, right? And like having them literally be at different times of day. And then since that would be unpaid otherwise, that I will have to charge the patient for those, right? So it's just helped me to kind of delineate, and will change my behavior a bit because it's something I was already considering doing anyway. And then the last bit in terms of what you can bill hourly is called clinical administration. And at first I got excited thinking like, oh, so like the time I'm overseeing my finances, the time we spend in like MD meetings, we could like bill all of that. And I think we could bill some of it, but they've said specifically you're only allowed to bill hourly for things that are specifically related to patients, EMR work, screening plans, QI initiatives, so patient access slash equity, digital solution initiative. So if we're talking, say, in our MD meeting, about like a change management, about a project to improve our care, then it appears that we'd be allowed to bill that time because that's sort of the clinical administrative stuff. And even for myself, I could consider like if there's a time that I'm, maybe before was doing too many prescription renewals, or I have one day a week where I actually don't have that much inbox work because Amy does it for me, even though I'm in clinic, I could like set aside some time to actually oversee my panel a bit, look at the EMR. Like there's some things that I used to kind of just do off the side of my desk. I could kind of intentionally do those at a certain time of day and remember to bill for them. That was kind of neat to see as well. So those are the details, right? So like if you had just seen the high level heading, you're like, okay, I can bill for some of this. You'd be making some potentially false assumptions, good or bad, about what you're allowed to bill. But because I kind of did my pause, pivot, pacing, I actually got down to the granular level of like what it says in this document about what I'm able to bill or not bill under the model as it exists and is proposed now. And I can get a clearer sense of what behaviors I may want to start preparing for and changing, and what things do I absolutely not want to change at all because I'm not interested in being incentivized in that way, or it's irrelevant to me, right? So there were some maximums, like you can only bill up to 14 hours a day. I will be fine. I will not be exceeding that maximum. I will be very much under exceeding that maximum. Thank you very much. And 240 hours per 28-day cycle. Again, never going to clear that. Don't have to worry about me taking too much money, ministry, because I am not interested in that project. Thank you. But if I was thinking like I have to maximize, I'd be like, okay, I guess I have to like work 14 hours a day because that's how I can make the most amount of money. No, I don't want to think that way. I want to have happiness and choose happiness in this lifetime. Thank you. And for me, money's one of several ingredients that help bring me happiness, space, and well-being being the most priority. Another thing to note is that only up to 25% of your total hours can be indirect care or admin, and only 5% max of the total hours can be that clinical admin category. And I actually had ChatGPT kind of track my hours for a week this past week just to see. It looks like these days, though the forms thing, third-party forms not counting would change them, but like I had counted my time doing those too. I was over the 25%. It was like 30% or even 40% sometimes of time spent doing indirect care instead of patient care. So that's something I would look at. The main thing I would look at is like, oh, so could I actually get more focused and efficient at my indirect care time and like maybe see more patients, but other than that, like just leave earlier, just actually take a lunch and, go for a walk, which I actually already do. Right. So it's like, okay, could I get more efficient about I am working and doing my indirect care? Now I'm probably over my max. So if there's nothing that's urgent, I'm going to stop working and it can wait for the next day. And instead, I'm just going to leave and go home and relax because I'm not getting paid for it anyway. Like you can see how it's something I'd want to do anyway. And so using this incentive can shift my thinking further in that direction of something I already wanted to do, right? Some other details that I found useful to know, because I'm starting to imagine how I might track my time, because they may come up with some system for us to do it. They also may not. And so basically it's like there's a billing code for direct patient care. There's going to be a billing code for indirect patient care. There's going to be a billing code for that clinical admin. They don't have real codes yet, but that's like what they're proposing. And then each day you would submit so many units for each code. And like, so if you submit, say it's like AXXX was like one of them, right? So it's like that code is direct patient care. So you could submit like 5.5 units of that. And that would mean 5.5 hours of time you spent doing that, right? And it's in 15-minute increments. So it'll be like 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1, and upwards, right? So that's useful. So whatever kind of system we want to use for tracking, making sure it's tracking in that way. So I actually started to set up a little folder in my chat GPT that I've been using that's like, when I dictate into about like the hours I spent during this versus that, I'll be like, okay, clinic, I was in clinic from 9 till noon and then 1:30 to 3:30. And then I inbox between these times, please calculate my total for the day. And then it like will do it to the 15-minute increment. So I'm already thinking like, what's the quickest, most efficient, non-stressful way to potentially incorporate this change, right? So when you ask those questions, you get those answers and life gets better. So that's a piece that was useful to know. Other things that were useful to notice and celebrate is that they are giving a raise on like shadow billing. So right now, for every fee code that we bill for a patient we see and do an assessment of or whatever, we get like 19.41%, which is extremely random. That's going up to 30 for in-basket visits. After hours are going from 30 to 50%. Lovely, because, after hours, not as fun to work, so useful. And even a bigger jump is certain procedures like pap smears, IUDs, skin procedures. They're going from that 19.41% up to 50%. And I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think I knew that those were in basket. So I'm sort of like retroactively like, oh, I've really not paid that much for PAPs and IUDs and my procedure clinic or whatever. I'm like, wow, I'm really not paid much for those codes. And it'll be nice. I'll be paid more in the future. Good to know. And so all of that is another way that there will be a raise. So that will help compensate for the top line after hours bonus and that CCM that's being removed. This will increase income for things you're already doing. And you can see this is a line item where if you want to incentivize yourself to the max, you can be like, oh, so now that I'm getting more of each fee code, I will make more money if I bill more fee codes, aka see more patients, act more like a fee for service model. Like I understand how you can take this information and say, well, if I'm going to get more of the code anyway, I'll just see more people and act like a fee for service doctor. And if you want to do that and that's like, hooray, finally, I've been wanting to act like that, that's perfect. I know that I don't want to do that. I want to see patients in a paced way and have a maximum per day that feels good for me and my capacity. And so instead, I'm going to say, hooray, the patients that I was going to see anyway, I now get paid a little more for. I'm otherwise not choosing to allow this to change my behavior. Thank you. There was a couple other details like attachment bonuses. So when I enroll new patients, there's going to be a fee attached to it. It sounds like they have not fully figured out how that will be because there's like complexity that may mean you get a higher dollar amount for rostering. It's supposed to have started July 1st, which is already passed. So I'm imagining this is going to be some kind of retroactive thing because they don't actually have the details started. And it should be that they retroactively do it just like if you roster the normal way and build the normal enrollment code, and then they'll figure out a way to like retroactively pay it, hopefully. If you happen to be the leader or have a leadership role in your FHO, and right now you're getting some amount of money for that, that's going to increase. And so to reward those that are doing that administrative work on behalf of the FHO, which seems lovely and is not directly applicable to me. There's something that's coming into play that has not been fully detailed out, which is instead of that access bonus thing, there's going to be some kind of new report that's coming to us called a continuity of care report. And it'll show you the percentage of visits of rostered patients, of you, people in your FHO, as well as acceptable providers like emergency room and hospital and focused family practice. I think again, so like if you have a percentage of visits that's like low on the acceptable people seeing it, the presumption is that too many of your patients are being seen by walk-in clinics. But the thing they have not at all agreed with is like, does something happen to you financially if that percentage goes down? So I see a lot of people making, in my opinion, a potentially like scarcity survival brain assumption that it's definitely going to be harmful to them. And I think we just need more information. Like we literally don't even know what percentage has been agreed to. And so we don't know how much to think about that. But I will likely have the exact same approach that I have to the access bonus negation roster now, which is I barely glance at it. I do not let it determine how I feel about my patients or my practice. Whatever money I get is the money I get. And because patient behavior is actually not in my control, I do not let myself get all worked up about people seeing other people. Other than like, if they say to me, oh yeah, I just saw a walk-in clinic, I'll say like, hey, do you know there's an after hours clinic? or I could have seen you, like just to check so that they know that. And that's as far as I go. There's some other things about location rules that I'm not going into because they don't apply to me and I don't understand them. Some things about inpatient hospital work that apply to people who do that work. That seems like it's good because it's less negation or it's out of basket, so you get paid the whole fee. There seems to be some agreements that new physicians will declare, and that will mean that they agree to be responsible for their practice. Yeah, so those are all the details. Those are, you could say, like the math and the facts. I tried to say them as neutrally as possible. And you heard me overlay like the conclusions I'm making from them, from what I value, from the model of care that I already enjoy practicing in, knowing absolutely I'm always going to leave money on the table. I am not trying to maximize any kind of billings. I'm not trying to minimize billings either. I would like to know in this new model how to make money and how to be wise about how I bill. So I'm honoring the work I'm doing and accurately billing for it. And if there's ways to be strategic, so then I end up making more money for work I'd rather do anyway, I'm into that. But like, that's how I'm thinking of it versus like, are we doomed? Do I have to now maximize and alter all of my behavior based on what this new model tells me I'm supposed to? And the answer, in my opinion, for me is no. You get to decide for yourself. That's what I'm saying. You decide for yourself. Yeah, so conclusions. This new model values some things that I do more. So like higher percent of shadow billings, hourly rate, including for indirect patient care. So like it values the care that I'm offering to the patients I'm offering now, including care that like in the old system, it hasn't been valuing. It'll value at an hourly rate the time I spend doing my patient portal and stuff. So I celebrate that. I think that's wonderful. It also removes a really harmful aspect of the old funding model, which is the negation. And I celebrate that. And I name the asterisks of the to be seen consequence of this new continuity of care report. People are assuming in that black and white survival brain way, in my opinion, that it's going to be exactly like the negation and then everyone's going to suffer. And I just wonder if that's true. And I think we'd actually have to look at what percent they agree to, how it's rolled out, literally how the ministry interprets it. Will I be surprised if there's some funky consequence based on like the track record of how access bonus goes? I won't be fully surprised, but I'm also not going to predict and pre-doom myself when I just truly don't know either way. And I'm still absolutely going to celebrate not having negation on the menu anymore because it's terrible. Hooray! Something is changing about it, hopefully in a good direction, where people aren't yelling at their patients so much. Definitely the model fails to value other ways I offer care to my patients. So I directly pay my nurse practitioner, I directly pay nurses and admin, and it's not having any kind of mechanism other than like the direct billing fees for me to fund all of that. And I think it would have been easy for them to add it in. So it's really not being more Dutch or Danish, if you remember my episode with Tara Kieran, like where, I'm the GP manager and owner of the clinic, and I have the funding explicitly to support all these other people to help see patients with me. It doesn't have that in this at all. And so if the ministry is listening, listen, can I just bill the hourly rate for my nurse practitioner's time she spends seeing patients? So it's like, if patients are being seen for scheduled appointments for equivalent care that I'd be offering, but it's by someone else, but under my supervision, can I bill the hourly rate for them? Right now, it's clear the model says no to that. I propose they would add that in. That would be lovely. I would love that. And I'm going to be okay either way, because I crunch the numbers and I know I'm going to be okay either way. I will be okay emotionally, because even if financially I was going to struggle, I get to decide the story I tell, which directs what emotions I feel, and I would find a way through it. I've survived and thrived in many environments, but in this case, I really will be financially okay, because I'll be at least as equal in my income as I am now. And it does seem like probably at least a little more, which hooray. And emotional will be okay, because that's up to me. Another story that I'm choosing to tell myself that motivates me in a direction I want it to motivate me is seeing how the ministry thinks about physicians and wants to incentivize physicians to do more of the care by themselves. They're still thinking that it matters most if the physician is seeing all the patients themselves, and they're not thinking in this team-based, delegation-based way. It just confirms something I already knew, which is there's no Calvary coming to save me. No one's going to perfectly hand me the model that's going to perfectly support me the way I want. It is up to me to adapt to that, whatever models they give me, is up to me to make those changes for myself. Certainly within the realistic constraints that are offered to me, but I have the capacity, creativity, ingenuity to do that. I'm already doing that. And this model change, I won't let it take the gains that I've made and how I've designed my practice away from me. I will find a way to continue to fund it and hopefully find a way to fund it better, right? And like I said at the beginning, the thing that I really wanted to remind myself is like that I've just never modeled my practice after the billing incentives, like the KO30 diabetic codus is just an example. I choose the pieces that align with my values, especially the value of space and sustainability, as well as more options for patients, like the asynchronous patient communication being something that patients value and is more efficient for me. And I'm going to continue to do that in this new model, and including in ways that it's more funded, which is great. I'm going to make sure I'm accurate in my direct care billing and include times I'm overseeing a resident, and that could be helpful. I'm planning to look into the fax prescription renewals, really fully recognizing in the old and new model that this is actually not a piece of what's funded by the government. And so instead, having a mechanism for it to be funded in another way would be wise. So those are sort of my takeaways at this point. I don't think the sky is falling. I also don't think that this is like the magical solution that on its own will save primary care. I do think it would be helpful for us to be having kind of more nuanced conversations that include what we find hopeful about this model, just so that, the new grads and residents and med students that are listening may see that there is hope in these models and they can find a sustainable way to practice themselves within this new model. I do think that would be helpful, but that's just my opinion. No one has to agree with it, but that's just what I think. Yeah. And I think that's all I have to say. So bottom line, when you notice everyone's telling a tale about something that's changing, scuttlebutt around possible changes happening to your system or your funding, pause, notice if survival brains seem to be ruling the day, because they usually are. Pivot from survival brain to learning brain and ask really like abundance-based, safety-grounded, values-aligned questions that are applicable to you and you alone. That's the pivot. And pace yourself. So knowing that this can be activating when you're working through a change, do it in small bursts, do it with the help of other people that can stay in learning brain with you, or AI like I was using, whatever works for you. And yeah, get clear about the math versus the story, because the math is neutral and is the same no matter what we think about it. The story is optional, and you get to decide which story actually serves you and produces the emotions and actions and results that you want in your life. I hope this was helpful. Kind of a different style podcast because it went into details about a very specific piece of legislation. And what is this even? This policy, a funding policy? But yeah, I hope it was helpful. And let me know what you're thinking. What stories have you noticed popping up for you around the FHO Plus model if you're in family medicine like me, or a similar change that, came down the pike in your workplace? And if you want, I can even, cheer you on and offer some suggestions of how to find more generative, abundance-based stories for yourself. All right. So with that, thanks as always for listening, and talk to you next time. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work in healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.